I used to work as a pizza delivery driver when I was in college. It wasn't a bad job, decent tips, flexible hours, and most of the time, I didn't have to deal with people for too long. But one night, I had a delivery that still haunts me to this day. It was late, almost 11:30 p.m., and I was just about to finish my shift when the order came in. The address was unfamiliar, a house way out on the edge of town, past where most of the neighborhoods ended. My manager asked if I wanted to take it, and since it was my last delivery, I figured I'd do it and head home. I plugged the address into my GPS and started driving. The farther I went, the fewer houses there were. The streetlights became more spaced out, and eventually I was driving down a long, dark road surrounded by trees. My headlights were the only source of light, and the road felt endless. Finally, I saw it. A house at the very end of the road. It looked old, like it had been there for decades, maybe longer. There were no other houses nearby, just thick woods on either side. The porch light was on, but the rest of the house was completely dark. No lights in the windows, no signs of movement inside. I pulled up, grabbed the pizza, and walked to the door. The air felt heavy, almost too still. Something about the place unsettled me, but I figured it was just because of how isolated it was. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I was about to knock a third time when I heard it. A sound coming from inside the house. It was faint, but it sounded like whispering. Multiple voices, too quiet to make out what they were saying. I took a step back. My first thought was that someone had placed a prank order and was trying to mess with me. Then I noticed something even stranger. The door was slightly open, just a crack. That door hadn't been open when I knocked. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see inside. The hallway beyond was completely dark, and the whispering stopped the second I moved. A wave of unease washed over me. Something was off. I decided to just leave. No tip was worth this level of creepiness. As I turned to walk back to my car, a voice called out from inside the house. Low, raspy, almost too quiet to hear. Don't go. I stopped. Every hair on my body stood on end. I turned back toward the door, my heart pounding. Your pizza's here, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. Then the door slowly creaked open a little more. The hallway was still pitch black, but now I could see the edge of a staircase leading up to the second floor. The air coming from inside felt cold, like the house had been abandoned for a long time. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go inside, but I also didn't want to just stand there. Then out of the darkness, I saw something move. A shape, barely visible in the shadows at the top of the stairs. It was tall, too tall for a normal person, and it stood completely still. I took a step back. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but my legs felt frozen. Then the whispering started again. But this time, it was coming from right next to me. I spun around expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one. That was it. I dropped the pizza box on the porch and bolted to my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking as I yanked open the door and jumped inside. As I started the engine, my headlights lit up the house. The front door was wide open now, and in the doorway, just beyond the reach of the light, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its head was tilted at an unnatural angle. It wasn't moving. It was just watching me. I slammed my car into reverse and sped out of there, not looking back. My heart didn't stop pounding until I was miles away, back in town, where there were people, streetlights, and safety. The next day, I told my manager about it. He looked up the address, confused, and then said something that made my blood run cold. That house? That place burned down years ago. No one lives there. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said I wasn't taking any more deliveries out there. Ever. I still don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if someone was really there or if something else was in that house, waiting. But I do know one thing. When I was running to my car, just before I shut the door, I swear I heard that same raspy whisper. Don't go. A few years ago, I worked as a delivery driver for a local restaurant in a small town. It wasn't a big chain, just one of those family-owned places that had been around forever. The The job was easy enough. Drive around, drop off food, collect tips. But one night, I got a delivery order that still haunts me to this day. It was late, close to midnight, and I was getting ready to head home when the last order came in. The address was weird, out on the edge of town, near a stretch of thick woods that barely had any houses. I asked my manager about it, and he just shrugged. They're a regular. They tip well. Just take it and head home after. I sighed, grabbed the bag, and punched the address into my GPS. The drive was long and eerie, taking me down roads that felt more like narrow dirt trails. No streetlights, no signs of civilization, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. After what felt like forever, I finally saw a mailbox with the right number. The house was set back in the trees, barely visible from the road. It was an old cabin, completely isolated. No lights on inside, no cars in the driveway. I pulled up and parked, but something about the place felt wrong. There was no sign of life, just silence except for the faint sound of crickets and the occasional rustling in the trees. I grabbed the food and walked up to the porch. The wooden planks creaked under my feet, and as I knocked on the door, I felt a sudden wave of unease. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I was about to turn around and leave when I noticed something. The door wasn't completely closed. It was slightly ajar, just enough to leave a small gap. A strange feeling washed over me, like I was being watched. I peered inside, trying to see if anyone was home, but all I could make out was darkness. That's when I heard it, a whisper. It was so quiet I almost thought I imagined it. But then I heard it again, low, raspy, coming from inside the house. I took a step back, my pulse quickening. I wasn't about to walk into some stranger's house, even if the door was open. I set the bag down on the porch and turned to leave. That's when I heard the whisper again. Only this time, it was coming from the woods behind the house. A chill ran down my spine. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the dark tree line. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something watching me. Then I heard movement. Something big was shifting in the trees, leaves crunching, branches snapping. Whatever it wasn't an animal. It was too heavy. I took a few steps toward my car, my hands shaking as I reached for my keys. But before I could get in, I saw it. A figure, tall, unnaturally thin, standing just at the edge of the trees. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a shadow or a tree that looked like a person. But then it moved. It took a slow, deliberate step toward me. That was enough. I yanked open my car door, jumped inside, and slammed it shut. My hands fumbled as I started the engine, my breath coming in short gasps. I put the car in reverse, but just before I hit the gas, I made the mistake of looking back at the house. The front door was wide open now, and standing in the doorway was another figure, identical to the one in the woods. Both of them just standing there, staring at me. That was it. I floored it, speeding down the dirt road as fast as I could. I didn't care about potholes or branches scraping the sides of my car. I just needed to get away. By the time I made it back to town, my hands were still shaking. I went straight home, locked every door and window, and barely slept that night. The next morning, I told my manager I wasn't delivering to that address again. He gave me a weird look and said, "What are you talking about? That place hasn't ordered food in years." I told him the exact address, the cabin in the woods, but he just shook his head. That place burned down a long time ago. No one lives there. I didn't argue, I just nodded and tried to move on. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving alone, I still get that feeling, like something or someone is watching me from the trees. I used to work the late shift at a small diner just off the highway. It wasn't much, just a little rundown spot with flickering neon lights and a jukebox that barely worked. It was the kind of place that truckers, night owls, and the occasional drifter would stop by for a cheap meal and a cup of coffee. For the most part, it was quiet, peaceful even, but one night changed everything. It started with a man sitting alone in the farthest booth. He came in around midnight when the place was nearly empty. I remember because I was cleaning the counter, humming along to some old song playing faintly through the speakers. When I looked up, he was just there, sitting in the shadows. I hadn't heard the bell above the door ring. I hadn't heard footsteps. Nothing. I grabbed my notepad and walked over to his table. "Hey there, what can I get you?" He didn't respond. He was wearing a black hoodie, the hood pulled low over his face. His hands were folded neatly on the table, long fingers tapping absently against the surface. His nails were dirty, not like he had been working on cars or something. Filthy, like he had been digging through something he shouldn't have. I tried again. "Sir, do you need a menu?" Slowly his head lifted just enough for me to see his mouth. He was smiling. Not a friendly smile. Not even a polite one. It was stretched too wide, teeth slightly parted, like he was waiting for me to figure something out. I felt a cold chill creep down my spine. "Okay. Well, let me know if you need anything." I forced a smile and walked back to the counter. I kept an eye on him from across the room. He never ordered, never touched the napkin dispenser or looked at the menu. He just sat there facing me, smiling. At some point, I must have looked away, because when I glanced back, he was gone. The booth was empty. The door never opened. The bell never rang. But when I went to wipe down the table, I found something sitting in the middle of it. A single Polaroid photo of me. Not from that night. Not even from inside the diner. It was me in the parking lot, walking to my car, taken from behind. I felt sick. My head snapped up, scanning the diner, the street outside, the lot. Nothing. No sign of him. I was completely alone. Things got worse. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just some creep trying to mess with me. But the next night he came back. Same booth, same posture, same smile. I didn't go over this time. I just watched him from the counter, pretending to be busy. That's when I noticed something. The pockets of his hoodie were moving. Something inside was shifting. He was holding something. I didn't want to know what. I turned to grab the phone, to call my manager or maybe even the police. But when I turned back, he was gone. This time I ran outside. The parking lot was dead silent, only a few dim lights buzzing above. My car was the only one out there, parked near the back fence. Something made my stomach drop. My driver's side door was open. I ran to it, heart pounding, and stopped just short. Sitting on the driver's seat was another Polaroid. This one was worse. It was taken through my bedroom window. I wasn't in it. Just my bed, my blanket slightly pulled back, like I had just gotten up. He had been there, watching me. I didn't go home that night. I called my brother and crashed at his place. He thought I was being paranoid until I showed him the photos. The next night, he offered to pick me up after work. I made it through my shift, constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling that awful, crawling sensation that I was being watched. At closing time, I walked to the door, peering out into the lot. My brother's car was there, parked near mine. I didn't see anyone else. I hurried outside, but as I passed my car, I saw something that made me stop dead. A handprint on my driver's side window. Not just any handprint. It was smeared, like someone had been dragging their fingers down the glass. I turned toward my brother's car, ready to run, when I caught movement from the corner of my eye. Across the street, standing just outside the reach of the streetlights, was the man. Not moving, not hiding, just standing there, watching me. I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was smiling. I ran to my brother's car and locked the doors the second I got in. When I looked back, he was gone. That was the last time I saw him. But for months after, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching, waiting. I used to live alone in a small apartment just a few blocks from my college campus. It wasn't anything fancy, just a one-bedroom place with old wooden floors that creaked every time I moved. But it was mine, and I liked the independence. That all changed when the call started. It was a Thursday night, around 11 p.m., when my phone rang. I was halfway through an assignment, so I almost ignored it. But when I checked the screen, it was an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something about it made me curious. I swiped to answer. At first, there was nothing. No breathing, no background noise, just complete silence. "Hello," I said. No response. I hung up, shaking my head. Probably a prank or a wrong number. But the next night, it happened again. Same time. Same unknown number. Again, silence. I hung up and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. By the third night, I was getting annoyed. When the phone rang, I answered sharply. "Listen, I don't know who this is, but stop calling me." Still nothing. I was about to hang up, but then a faint click, like someone had just ended the call on their end. That's when I started feeling watched. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a weird gut feeling, like someone was too close, even when I was alone in my apartment. I started double-checking my locks before bed. I kept my blinds shut. I even started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow, just in case. A week passed. The calls stopped. I let my guard down. One night I came home late from a study session. As I reached my door, I noticed something slipped underneath it. A small square piece of paper. No, not paper. A Polaroid photo. Confused, I picked it up and turned it over. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. It was a picture of me. Not from earlier in the day, not from outside. It was a picture of me sleeping in my bed. The angle, it was taken from inside my bedroom. My breath hitched. I looked up and down the hallway, but it was empty. My hands were shaking as I fumbled to unlock my door. Once inside, I locked everything. The door, the windows, even wedged a chair under the doorknob. I barely slept that night. Every sound made my heart race. Every shadow made me paranoid. By morning, I convinced myself it was a sick joke. Maybe one of my friends thought it would be funny to mess with me. I called a couple of them, but they all swore they had nothing to do with it. That's when I noticed something else. My window, the one next to my bed, was unlocked. I never left my windows unlocked. I called the police. They didn't do much. Since there was no forced entry and nothing was stolen, they just suggested I be more careful. Maybe invest in some security cameras. They took the photo, but didn't seem too concerned. That night, I bought a lock for my window and double-checked every inch of my apartment. When I was sure everything was secure, I crawled into bed and tried to sleep. Then, at exactly 11 p.m., my phone rang. I sat up, my heart pounding. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I just watched as it rang and rang until it finally stopped. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. One new message. I hesitated before opening it. There was no text, just a single attachment, a photo of me, sitting in my bed holding my phone, taken from my closet. Thank you for watching and taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Your support means a lot and helps keep these stories coming. If you found this story interesting, feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you'd like to support the channel even further, a like and share go a long way in helping spread these stories. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.